human rights of ordinary South Africans. But I think that there's a sort of a different element here, is that we've lost the belief and imagination that we can even have the tools to hold them to account. And I think that's the real problem within institutions like the Hawks and the National Prosecuting Authority. I'm not convinced they simply don't care, but I don't think they have the imagination, and they certainly don't have the kind of leadership that looks to hold the powerful to account. Where they have tried to do this, we've seen some state capture cases that have failed dismally. The Koko matter, for example, which is important, but is only one part of the bigger state capture puzzle this week. Now, when you see them lose cases like that in court, and you ask yourself, how are they ever going to go after the big banks? And I get the sense right now there is no real team that's working at holding the HSBCs, the Standard Banks, the Nedbanks, the others that were implicated in state capture responsible. And that certainly is something that the bankers, that the directors in these banks are quite happy about, because they can kind of move on and forget that chapter. And quite frankly, that's why these practices continue. They will do the same thing again in future. There will be corrupt bankers that will hurt and damage the lives of ordinary South Africans, because we simply are not doing the right thing to hold them to account.
And of course, again, what's been laid bare is that these are global syndicates at work in this latest rand manipulation saga. Standard Chartered Bank, a part of that group, they of course come clean to the Competition Commission, which of course confined itself to the branches that operate here in South Africa. But again, just going to that accountability question, Hennie, how do we do better on this? I take your point about perhaps the constraints, capacity and otherwise resource constraints that the NPA may have. But is that good enough? Is that a good enough reason for things to just be left to go on unattended? Because it's not going to be long before we hear another scandal, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think we as Open Secrets would argue it's not good enough to say that people have capacity constraints. Institutions like the Prosecuting Authority and others sit on significant budgets. There may be attempts by politicians to try and curtail them right now and spend more money on blue light brigades. But the truth is, they have the leadership in place for years. They were supposed to clean out the bad apples with institutions like that, and then show the public that they are very serious about changing the way that corrupt systems work in a country like South Africa, so we can change the way that works globally, Sakina. And that was going after the big players, the big politicians, the big corporations, including the big banks. We've seen very little to none of that. Where they've attempted to do that, they've failed. And quite frankly, the leadership of institutions like the Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks must be held to account for the failure that has happened on their watch. Because they may feel that their ego is bruised when we criticize them in a manner like this. But after they take their pensions and they head off into the sunset one day, the rest of us are going to be left in a country like South Africa, where we will be pummeled and bruised again by institutions who are part of these corrupt systems. And that's what we have to change. And that's why it's the responsibility of the institutions of the state to make sure that we change the way the pattern, the systems of the system works and functions. And maybe what the Competition Commission has done is helpful in one instance, and it's only one slice of that malfeasance, Sakina. They have managed to bring to light a particular kind of practice that cannot be allowed to continue. There's a huge amount of other things that are taking place, and it is the responsibility of our state institutions to stop making excuses and stop complaining and stop going before Parliament telling us they're trying to do something. We need to see action, we need to see consequences, and we need to see the directors of these big banks and corporations in court and being prosecuted for their crimes.
Hennie van Vuuren, thank you so much for your time this morning, founding director of Open Secrets, talking to us about the banks and, this history of acting with impunity. And that, of course, in their book, The Untouchables as well. If you haven't read it, get yourself a copy.
This is a definite must-get. So.